Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the annual Hellenic Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry event for International Women's Day. Before we start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. My board colleague Vicky Alexiou was set to be your MC this evening, however she couldn't make it at the last minute due to unforeseen circumstances, which means that I'm here to do what women do best, which is multitask. And I will be asking questions of our lovely panellists, but I'll also be your MC for this evening. So my name is Fotini Kypraios. I'm the chair of the board of HACCI, and I'd like to thank you all on behalf of the board for being here in person. It's just amazing to see you all here in person tonight. The last time we ran this event before lockdown in 2020 was in this very place. And there were a couple of people who dropped out at the last minute because there were whispers of someone catching this thing called COVID at the South Melbourne market. And we didn't know what we were in store for. So I think it was 3 days later, we were actually officially locked down for the first time. So thank you for being here. So our International Women's Day event is one of the rare events in Melbourne that wasn't cancelled over 2020 and 2021. We managed to actually meet last year at the library at the dock in a COVID-safe format. And so we find ourselves here again today. And we're lucky to be able to host you all here tonight, thanks to the support of our great partners. And I'd like to take a moment to thank them for their steadfast and ongoing support, especially over the last 2 years and for this evening's celebration. So firstly, I extend our thanks to our chamber partner, the Bank of Sydney, represented tonight by the State Manager for Victoria, Theokalidis. We are also very grateful to our event partners and HACCI corporate partners, BDO Australia, Flowers Vazette, who is responsible for these amazing arrangements you see tonight, and I didn't tell them what colour I was wearing, it just happened that way. Mocha Foods, ProCal, Salary Masters, Structural Challenge, Thematikos, Greek Media Group, Intralot Australia, Jobsbank Limited, the Patras Group, the Content Engine and Prisma Legal. Of course, thank you to our community partner, Hellenic Power also. I'd like to extend a special welcome to a couple of people. I will introduce our panellists in a moment, but a special welcome to our immediate past chair of the HACCI board, who was the inaugural female chair of HACCI in its 40-odd year history, Georgina Poulos, who is here with us this evening. Welcome to the President of the Greek Community of Melbourne and Victoria and VMC Commissioner, Bill Babaseriadi. Welcome. And to the immediate past and inaugural female Vice President of the Greek Community of Melbourne and Victoria, Tammy Iliou. A special welcome also to the Honorary Jenny Makakos joining us here this evening. So apart from being unaffected by the pandemic, our International Women's Day event is also one of our flagship events every year. And it is telling that this event this year sold out within just a few hours. The only thing that would make us happier is if we didn't have to hold these events at all, of course, and if gender-related problems didn't exist, and a lack of equality was no longer an issue. Unfortunately, for all the progress that has been made to date, there's still a very long way to go. According to statistics published by the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, the full-time average weekly ordinary earnings for women are still 13.8% less than for men, and this has actually decreased by 0.4% since May last year. And according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report of 2021, another generation of women will have to wait for gender parity, with the global gender gap having actually increased from 99.5 years to 135.6 years due to the pandemic and the related economic downturn. So we're in fact going backwards. The theme of this year's International Women's Day campaign is Break the Bias. So bias is all around us and we each actively engage in it, whether we are consciously aware of it or otherwise. We all categorise information along with lines of preconceived constructs and patterns because this is human nature. The way we dress, people's surnames, the colour of their skin, their ethnicity and of course their gender all impact our interactions and impact the availability of opportunities for many in the community and of course many more than others. This year's theme of Break the Bias is an important opportunity to consciously examine our biases, recognise biases that exist, preventing equality and inclusion, both as private citizens and employers, and break them down. My lectern is moving away from me. So our theme is a call to action, and this is very important because if there's anything we're certain of when we plan our annual event is that our goal is not to merely raise awareness, because we're all perfectly aware of what's going on. What we want to achieve is tangible change and meaningful discussions about real outcomes. And thankfully, we have three amazing women with us tonight who have been doing just that, moving things forward towards change. So, Victorian Multicultural Commission Chair, Viv Nguyen, is a passionate advocate. Watch your step. So Viv Nguyen is a passionate advocate for genuine community engagement and diversity. Please take a seat. Get comfortable. Viv has brought her vast experience as a business executive and a community leader in corporate, community and government settings agencies to the Victorian Multicultural Commission. And after years of helping organisations advance their social objectives, she's now set to inspire Victorians to continue embracing our beautiful multicultural diversity. So please welcome Viv Nguyen. Corinne Proske, please step up to the stage. Is the CEO of Jobsbank, an independent not-for-profit helping businesses navigate social procurement, diversity and inclusion. Jobsbank is focused on working with employers to create meaningful opportunities for job seekers facing barriers to employment. Corinne is also the chair of the Difference Incubator, which helps social enterprises become investment ready, and is a director of the Melbourne Catholic Development Fund. Please welcome Corinne. And last but certainly not least, Her Honour Nola Karapanagiotidis. Justice Karapanagiotidis is the winner of the HACCI 2021 Woman of Influence Award. She is also the first Greek-Australian woman to be appointed as a judge of the County Court Bench in Victoria. Having worked as a barrister for close to 2 decades, Her Honour has significant experience working with women in the criminal justice system, in community legal centres, at Victoria Legal Aid, and has helped countless refugees through her tireless work at the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. Please welcome our panel this evening. Now I'm putting my other hat on. Just
my brother, isn't he?
Was that Con saying bravo?
It was.
Thank you, Con. So I'd like to begin just with a general question for the three of you ladies, and please feel free to talk over one another because that's what Greeks do. On your views on how bias affects women in their personal, domestic and mostly professional life. And I'd like to get your initial thoughts on how you think bias impacts the fine agenda, the fair agenda, as I say. I'll give you
The honourable. Oh, look, to start by stating the obvious, bias I think is pervasive and it affects all of those areas. In terms of home life, I can't help but think that women are still carrying the load, and there's an expectation and just the reality that they assume a greater role in the home, look after children. There are assumptions in terms of professional life that go with that. For example, I certainly was a barrister for some 20 years, and it was not uncommon to have a question along the lines of, well, how do you manage children and work? Simply a question that a man would not be asked. I had colleagues who would be asked questions about what are your intentions of having a child, and colleagues who had been in law firms where maternity leave was practically non-existent. So I think it permeates so many different areas that it's quite difficult to answer that question. I just want to acknowledge and say that I do think that there's been enormous progress, and I've seen that, and I want to be positive, and I think we all want to move forward. But to answer that question, I just think it's so subtle at times, so obvious at other times, and all pervasive. But I will get to the positive a bit later on.
Yes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think the stats that you've just given us of, 136 years to get to gender parity, that's hard to look at. That's not my lifetime. It's not my son's lifetime. It's, we're a long way off, and we're going backwards. The pandemic has been good and bad. I think women have worn, and we know they've worn the brunt of caring at all levels, children, parents. There's a lot that the women often carry, and the home. Even today, I was laughing. I did some work meetings, then I went to pick up my son at school, then I took him swimming, I went swimming as well, then we looked at going to pick up the dog, then we got a snack, then we got home, I had to do my hair, and then I'm here. That's the logistic expert every day. We have to balance that. We have to share the care. It's better for all of us if we all share. And if we can't do that, the bias will remain. And what I see regularly is women taking themselves out of opportunities. What we've seen in the pandemic is women withdrawing from employment because they don't feel they're up for it, or they don't feel they can cope with that balance.
I totally agree, and I just want to add a couple of points. I think bias can come from our upbringing, what we've been taught at school, our culture, and what we assume about what society expects of us. And I think it's also requiring a conscious effort from us as well to take on these responsibilities and to actually be able to work through and to share the activity. But it's difficult when you've got a system that continues to tell you that's what you are supposed to be doing, this is what you are meant to be doing. I think for us, the systems and the systemic changes need to change to accommodate the way in which women operate, the way we live our lives, the way we think, the way we behave. And I think on that point, we still have a long way to go, even though we've made some progress. It's almost like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we need a lot more champions, whether they are male or female, to really try and drive the change, because without that, I don't think we can. And those statistics will continue to worsen over time.
So for the past few years, public discourse around feminism and women's experiences has been dominated by 2 main issues, and one is domestic violence, which is a pandemic in and of itself in this country, and variations of the MeToo movement, which most recently have reared its ugly head in the highest ranks of our systems and institutions. How do you think these issues are now shaping the conversation now that we have, more recently we've had Grace Tame speak out and other women of a higher profile who have been thrust into the spotlight, who are not of a multicultural background, I might add, but who now are being listened to? Do you think that's shaping the discourse and what people think needs to now happen?
I think it's great that the likes of Grace Tam and Brittany Higgins taking that personal courage to be able to bring forward the issues to the national agenda. I also think though, it's a significant amount of sacrifice, personal sacrifices that they have to wear in order to make those issues more bring it more to the consciousness of the nation. That is a woman of an Anglo-Saxon background. I think for a woman of colour to be able to gather that level of courage and bravery and the sacrifices that she has to make to bring an issue like that to the national consciousness is far more than what the likes of Grace and Brittany carries. We don't just carry our own personal challenges and issues and trauma, we carry the entire communities. And that sometimes brings us back and makes it so difficult for us to be able to bring that kind of issue forward. And I think that even if we did that, I'm not sure we're actually getting the attention from the nation either.
I'd agree with that. I don't think it's been heard. Hopefully we will be heard later. I think you've got to look at the stats. 1 in 3 women experience sexual harassment in the workplace and 1 in 5 sexual violence. That means that there's quite a few people in this room who will have experienced that. We actually have to get better at talking about it. Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins have given it a voice. I'm really proud that they're really young women who have stood up. I agree, the personal sacrifice is awful. But if we don't have a dialogue about this, it'll sit in the dark and nothing will change, because it's the silence of women in these situations that have allowed the power imbalances to continue. It is not acceptable in this country to be experiencing those things. We have to show and teach our daughters. We actually have to change the system. We can't blame the victim.
Yeah, look, I endorse everything that's been said, and just within the legal profession, you think about the impact of the MegToo movement, for example, and clearly it has opened the conversation. It has encouraged, I think, women, and we've seen that in recent times, to come forward. But I agree, it has come at a huge sacrifice, and we have to support women in being vocal, but also support them in retaining their jobs, remaining within their profession, and not effectively being punished for doing so. But I think the fact that it's being spoken about and it's having these conversations, that is positive, and you're getting very clear, in a very public way, you're getting statements that there is zero tolerance to sexual harassment in the workplace. Now, of course, we know that it's still prevalent. Of course, we know that there's so much work that needs to be done. But those conversations, those statements, unequivocal statements, are very important. We need more of them.
So, sticking with the justice system, we know that justice is blind, and there have been many steps taken forward, as you said before. International Women's Day, just a little bit preamble, is not about bagging men, and it's not about all gloom and doom and being negative. And I really agree with your comments earlier about we have to actually look at the positive steps and the progress that's been made. And within the justice system, I've been a lawyer for about 20 years, and having seen progress in some areas and very slow movements in others, from your perspective now as on the bench and having been a barrister for 2 decades, how is bias challenged within the justice system through the improvements that have been made, and what's in place to protect the integrity of the system against that bias permeating into our judiciary and allowing people access to justice?
I think that there are 2 levels maybe that I consider that question. First of all, people accessing the system, and women obviously in particular, and it's hard to view that in a vacuum. There are so many broader issues, why they end up there. It's inequity in housing, pay inequity that we spoke of, domestic violence. There are so many entrenched broader issues which for why women end up here and why perhaps they're a bit more vulnerable. I think that there have been improvements and certain protections put in place because now we are considering the conversation about violence against women, still very prevalent, but we're having those conversations. The law is changing to offer safer spaces to make the legal system more accessible. So I do think that there have been some changes. There need to be more, of course. And then I think in terms of women who work within the profession, and again, these open conversations, and also making the profession more diverse. I look at my own experience. You mentioned I was the first Greek woman appointed to the county court. I've been so embraced, and I've received so many beautiful comments and encouragement from the Greek community and other diverse women and women within that community. And it's because I believe that they're seeing somebody that reflects them, that represents them, that my experience perhaps resonates with them. And I think that if women both accessing the legal system and being part of it can see other women in positions of power that look like them and that have similar experiences, that's so powerful.
So what then would you think how would tangible change look? What would that look like for women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, both working within the law and accessing the system?
I think we need to make sure that we continue to have these conversations and consult with women from diverse and linguistically and culturally diverse backgrounds. So we need to be mindful of that, constantly making change, education, training, you see that being developed, and practical measures of making the system just one that women can access. When I think of asylum seeker women, for example, well, they have additional vulnerabilities, if I can put it that way. Their immigration status is uncertain. Again, bringing it back to core issues, they often don't have the right to work, they don't have income protection or security, they don't have healthcare. And so, of course, there are limitations. They're not going to be able to access the system. On top of that, you have other forms of bias with them. You've got you've got class issues, cultural issues, gender issues, and perhaps an unconscious bias that, well, within some cultures, violence is the norm or it's expected, and so we don't maybe respond or take it seriously. I think that there needs to be further, certainly education, and again, a broader approach to the issue.
Amazing insights, thank you. I'm going to move on to Viv. I'm going to move on to you now that we're talking about culturally and linguistically diverse people. We know there's no such thing as reverse racism, but can bias be a two-way street, do you think? So can the victims of bias, minorities, show bias themselves? And how does that affect relations between communities?
I think it's fair to say that we all have biases. That can come from a variety of sources, right? Culture, religion, education, upbringing, whatever it is that we gather in our life that gives us that sense of bias. It does, and it can go two ways, and we have seen that play out in the broader multicultural communities, and it affects so much the social cohesion and the fabrics of what is a multicultural society that we so want to see happen. And we have to have social cohesion. We cannot live together harmoniously when we have 200 plus ethnicities, 100 and something languages, 130 something faiths. We need to have some basis for which that we can live together, and we need to live together harmoniously. And when we have common issues like gender, family violence, mental health, those sorts of things, we need to come together. So whatever biases we have, we can unlearn. And that's the role of the education. And that education doesn't just happen in schools or at universities. It can happen anywhere and everywhere. And an event like this, primarily for the broader the Greek community, but I'm not one of those. And I am learning, and I am unlearning as well. And I think it's really important that we continue these sorts of activities to make sure that we create opportunities for people to unlearn or to learn some new things.
And what would you feel as your role as chair of the VMC? What is your priority in terms of trying to deal with these issues for women of diverse cultural backgrounds in the community?
For me, it's about pushing the system to change. We can do these things, and we do these things many times. We do it in a volunteering capacity. We do it out of our own hours. No one's asking us, no one's paying us. We do it. But I think the system does need to change. And one of the biggest challenges for me in the VMC, and I'm sure Bill recognises as well, is that we don't have the legislative mandate to push the internal government change. Other commissions do, and so we constantly have to work with them, and I hope one day we can change the legislation, give you a bit more power, or whoever becomes a chairperson after me to have the authority to do that. The government as an employer can do so much more. The government introduces legislation. Why can't the government live and practices its legislation? And that can be done through the workforce diversity of the Victorian public sector. It can be done through the culture of the Victorian public sector and in Parliament for that matter. There are so many things that I think if we can affect the system, at least the changes can be more sustainable and lasting. And that's a difficult road for me. It's easier for me to go out and talk to the communities. We understand each other. But when I receive the feedback from the community that requires systems change, what do I do with that? And that's where I spent a lot of my efforts trying to build relationships and connections in the departments to try and affect those sorts of changes. And it is hard. That is hard.
Chipping away. So you've got significant professional experience and experience in governance and business. So in your view, what is the role of business and entrepreneurship in breaking the bias for women in the workforce? That's a segue from you, and we'll get through to Corinne.
Well, there are many of you who are here who are also employers as well. I get that we say that, you know, we recruit for merit. That's fair enough. Or what is merit? What is it? The merit, is it qualification? Is that experience? Or is that the connection? When you get to a certain level of seniority, it isn't about qualifications. It isn't about merit. It is about that connection. When I meet with my new boss, potential new boss, am I getting on with her or him or them well? Is that merit? And if I have all of the things, if I don't follow the AFL, if I don't do this, if I don't do that, it's not that easy for me to make that connection. And therefore, the new boss will more often than not employ someone else. And that's a challenge for people from different culturally diverse backgrounds. Because of that, we don't have those natural connections. My mum and dad don't know the honourable. We don't have these connections. So we are starting from ground zero, and that's where it makes it really hard. For employers, I think they really need to be very explicit about their diversity and inclusion programs and policy and make it happen, not put it on a document and then leave it as it is. We need to, or the employers that is, well, you're asking me that, right? Yes. They need to leave it. They don't just put a document and then leave it to the HR director. They need to leave that as well.
So leading on to Corinne, that was my little segue there. Did you see that? What do you find the greatest gender-specific challenges for women in the workplace today, and how systemic are the cultural issues and gender issues?
Look, I think we're at a really interesting time at the moment. We've just experienced 2 years of working from home, and we've actually busted a myth that you can't be efficient working from home. I think the progress we've made in the last 2 years would have taken us 10 years. We have to hold on to the good bits. I don't want to homeschool again, but we have to hold on to some of this. We're going back to the office 1 day a week, maybe 2. This allows me to do school pickups. It allows me to have flexibility. If I can't trust my team to do their job, should they be part of the team is one of the questions. But so this opens up so many opportunities for people, whether it be women with caring duties, whether it be people who live with a disability, whether it's people who live regionally. This is a game changer. We have to, as employers and employees, look at holding on to some of this. Doesn't mean we're always virtual. I think just tonight highlights that we need to see each other, but it's part of this. That is the single biggest change I've experienced, and I think we need to relook at that. What we are also seeing is the pandemic was terrible for women. Women were the most impacted. They were the ones who lost the jobs the most. Women over 45 were those who were the worst hit, full stop, apart from young women. So we really need to help build their confidence at the moment. I'm seeing many talented people who lost their roles and who no longer have the confidence to put themselves up or who are going for jobs that are actually below their skill set. The main error I see in this is businesses are losing out on great talent. There is hidden talent sitting in our communities that's being untapped because they don't feel ready for it, and the employers aren't necessarily calling it out and looking for it. Some of these employees, if you unlock them, they're lifers. They're people who'll be there. They'll deliver more. They've got lived experience. You'll make a richer culture. But it has to be intentional. You can't just hope it's going to happen. You've got to make an effort. You've got to look for these people. You've got to look for cultural diversity, age diversity. You've got to bring the young people in. I'm finding the young people need the office the most. They need to learn off others. Whilst the older people are probably more open to some of the flexibility. It just depends what's happening at home, but we need to embrace this. It's an opportunity that we'd be, foolish to miss. And I'm seeing some signs of, I'll go back to 4 or 5 days. No, this actually doesn't serve us. Stand our ground.
So what kind of bias do you think job seekers and employers need to overcome in terms of both so as people are looking for jobs in the market, in terms of how they apply and how they're selected, but also just within the job market, generally you mentioned employers actually aren't calling it out and looking for it necessarily?
I think, and there's the intersectionality on this is really important. So if you are a woman of a culturally and linguistically diverse background, you are further down, and it sounds awful, but the darker your colour, the less likely you'll get a job. That is a reality of our culture and the bias that's sitting in our system. So for women like that to be put forward, to have the confidence to move into roles, we really need to support them. So part of that work is done in pre-employment work, but also then working with the employers. What kind of workplace is it? Are women welcome? What are the quality of jokes? Are we, all of that sets that cultural piece of, can I feel included and can I be myself at work? We spend a ridiculous amount of time at work. Fix the workplace, not the person. We need to change this attitude of my favourite is, how many mentoring programs do we need for women? Why not fix the workplaces and get rid of the mentoring programs? Women are pretty good at networking. So I think these are some of the changes we need to see and embrace, and also get wrong. Everything's a trial. Some things will work, some won't. Just keep evolving, keep sharing. We profile good stories where it works. I'm a child of migrant parents. I remember going to school where English was my second language and not understanding and being in the back row, and everyone assuming that because I didn't understand or couldn't talk, that I was stupid. And I channel that when I talk to employers around employees, because we misjudge the skill set that's sitting right in front of us. And they mightn't have Australian experience, that's the biggest barrier. Oh, you haven't worked here. Why don't we just ignore that? Look at what your skill set is. If your diploma comes from overseas, you could probably do the job. Give it a go, take the risk.
So speaking of employers, which is my next question. So as the CEO of an organisation that works really hard to remove barriers to employment, there are a lot of people in here that are employers, they run businesses, multi-generational businesses in fact. What advice would you give employers in terms of how they should maybe take a different view around recruitment and the way they employ people? I mean, you just touched on it, but can you delve a little bit deeper into that?
So a lot of businesses will use Seek, put the jobs up there. There's a lot of people who don't know how to use Seek, so there's a lot of talent sitting outside the system. We've got to tap into those networks. That's kind of what Jobsbank does, is help bring that talent out of the shadow. We call it the hidden talent. But I think you've got to think around how you word the job ads. Are you looking for qualifications? Are you looking for just skills? Do you really need an engineer for that job, or could it be broken up into other roles? Does it have to be full-time? Does it have to be 5 days in an office or on site? Think through all of that flexibility, and then positively discriminate in choosing different. Challenge yourself. We do that at work in our team. It's a really diverse team. Some days it's magic. Some days there's a bit of friction. Difference causes friction, but that also causes innovation.
So opening up to all of you, I'd like to hear from each of you now. In your experience as women, professional, successful women of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, what forms of bias did you have to overcome to get to where you are today?
I think in a conversation this evening I was sharing that to begin with, my achievements, so going to a public school, having migrant parents who worked in factories, being a girl, woman, I've always felt back then as being really the exception. It wasn't expected of me that I would do well. I felt like it was exceptional, if you like. So I remember, I have those memories of those feelings, and then entering the profession. I came to the bar when I was 26 as a barrister, and I remember feeling nervous and young and experiencing so many examples, little things. Ms. K, by the judiciary is how I was sometimes referred. Again, perhaps innocuous or not a big moment, but an example, if you like, of being asked if I was the interpreter when I was counsel, being at a bench in perhaps high profile matters where it was male dominated, being the subject and experiencing, as I think and I'm confident most women have in that profession and elsewhere, sexual harassment, bullying, and not necessarily speaking up about it on reflection. So I think I've experienced a variety of different biases as a Greek woman. Equally though, I really do feel compelled to say that I also have gratitude and a great deal of privilege. And for me, when discussing these issues, which are so important, I'm so grateful for events of this type. I also have a deep appreciation for my privilege, the opportunities I've had that many others have not.
I totally concur with a lot of what you've said. I think part of my other barrier, and Viv mentioned it before, I don't know anything about cricket. I don't know anything about AFL and can't play golf. Starting at Ernst & Young, I was their diversity recruit in the 90s. Yeah, with no accent. And they were really proud, and they had explained to me that women leave at about manager level there to have families, not that the culture was just uber sexist, like that was what you copped. They sent me out on a mine site for 3 weeks in far outback WA. I don't think I've ever experienced sexual harassment like I did on that site. I started to wear the mining outfit because at least I wouldn't get a date on the way to the toilet. And you kind of just sucked it up, because if you said anything, everyone went, what do you expect? It's got much better. I think people also understand the rules around it, but there is still an assumption if I go to a meeting with my chair, who's a man, that they talk to him first. There's an assumption if the woman's in the room and there's a man, he will be leading the conversation, and that's part of that bias.
I guess for me, my culture plays quite a role, and as I get older, I learn to leverage my culture. But as I was growing up, as an Asian woman, I was taught to be deferential. I was taught to pay respect, and I would give the respect to the person just because they hold an important position for no other reason. And so when I started working in the funds management and the banking sector, that didn't help me at all. It did not help me at all. So I would be going into a meeting and I would be preparing water. And you immediately get looked upon, down that you are some junior burger doing that, whereas I actually reported to the chief risk officer. it took a long time for me to actually realize something, and you learn that through the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs of your life, or somebody suddenly said something that, oh, it became an aha moment for me. But that's something that I've had to constantly unlearn, or learn when to apply and when not to apply that, because those things can be very challenging. I was too Australian in a Vietnamese family, and I'm too Vietnamese in my Australian context. You can never win. For a long time, I was thinking in Vietnamese, trying to speak it out in English, and vice versa. So it's all kind of get wobbled up in your brain, and it's still something that I struggle now, even to today. I don't know whether I can actually undo that, but I've become a lot more conscious of that. So I try to not apply bringing out water and all that. I can show care in maybe some other way instead of doing it that way. So, and it's the constant thing for me. And I don't know, I can't tell if that's actually helped me achieve my career or deter my career progress. I'm not sure. But it's a conscious thing in my mind every day, every waking moment. I'd wake up and I'm thinking, okay, so what am I going to do here? How do I apply that to my family, to my sons who've been born here in Australia? How do I do that, apply that to my mum? Like it's a constant challenge, and I guess sometimes an enjoyment too, if I found the right moment or the right balance or the right tone or the right tune. And that to me is something, on balance, I enjoy. But there have been moments when it's been pretty bad, and I wasn't brave then. I'm probably not as brave now. I'm learning to be more brave every day, and being around people like you today give me that extra level of bravery and courage to know that I'm not perfect, but I can try to, and through that exercise I can support myself and others around me. And that's what I take to my role as well.
Well said. It's incredible how our experiences as women are not that different, because a lot of the things you described, I'm sure a lot of women in this room of Greek background, Southern European background, have also experienced, but we've never had this conversation. And so there was one time where, wearing my HACCI hat, we had a meeting with politicians from Greece. So our culture is very, it's a very, there's a lot of, there's respect, but when it's sort of, people see me, if I have a senior position, it's sort of, it's not expected that I have any sort of other role. When I was the secretary of the board, I was introduced as the secretary to a politician visiting from Greece. So we went around this big boardroom table and everyone was asked from the HACCI board, and I'm the partner of this firm, and I'm a partner of an accounting firm, and I'm this and I'm that. And they didn't even ask me what I did because I was introduced as the secretary. So it's not malicious, and it's not anything that's sort of intentional. I suppose it's an unconscious bias. But these are the things that we notice and that our male counterparts perhaps don't, like asking us to get the water and things like that in boardroom meetings. It's very common. So it's wonderful that we can have these conversations, and I think it transcends culture, because you talk about the Vietnamese background or the German-French background, and in the Greek background it's been a very similar experience. So lastly, before I break for some questions, because I'm sure there are questions, aren't there? Many of them. There are some younger people of younger generation here. I know we've got 13 and 15-year-olds, we've got 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, we've got the next generation with us here. And because my daughter didn't want to ask this question, because being a Greek mum, I asked her to and she said no, I'm going to ask you. She's there, yes. If you were today, if you, when you were 15 or 18 or 16, however old you were, what's the piece of advice you wish someone had have given you at the age of this third generation of Greek Australians that we've got in the room today, whether as prospective graduates, employees, employers, and just citizens of multicultural community? What's the piece of advice you give them that you wish someone had given you at their age? Go for it.
For me, I would say be proud of what you have. Sometimes we didn't choose to be born Vietnamese or Greek. Learn about the culture, embrace it and be proud of it, because what you have is what many others don't. And I think it's really important that we do that. We can't change our skin color. So why not embrace what we have? That to me is really important. And recognize that extra special or uniqueness that you have in your culture. And there are so many things that you want to unlearn from your culture as well. But if you recognize that, then you can work out what you want to take and what you don't want to take. But to not know that, then you lose a significant part of you. And that's something that I always say to women of different culture or young people of different cultural backgrounds, because you've got it. Why not learn and be proud of it and then work out what you want to get rid of? There are some things in our cultures that I can speak about mine that I do want to get rid of. But it will take me time to do that because I've still got my parents who've got that. I've got uncles and aunties who've had all of this, and I can't say to them, Mum, Dad, get rid of that. Well, I can, but they're not going to do that because that's in them for a long time. We have to find different ways to ask them to undo or unlearn some of these things. And they will do that because they do that out of love for their children and for their family. They will do that. But it is a matter of finding that way, that tune, that tone to actually get them to do that. And that's the one thing I say for people of colour, whatever colour that is.
That's awesome. My mother she told me about a gift she was giving me when I was 16 that I want to share with others because it was so powerful. When my mother came to Australia, my grandmother came here, who didn't speak any English, to look after us. She gave my mum the gift of being able to work. My mum told me from a really young age, you can do whatever you want, I'll look after your kids. That ability to be able to have choices and be able to pursue whatever I wanted, just completely eye-opening. It just gave me choices. My son has a great relationship with his grandmother, who's completely bilingual. There's some real upside to that sharing. So it's a gift that you can give within families, and multicultural communities do that really well. Family's important, leverage it. It's a strength for growing our members.
Yeah, again, just very moving. For me, be confident is the advice I'd give particularly younger women within my profession and younger women generally. Back yourself. Your diversity is an asset. Your community mindedness is an asset. Your passion is an asset. So encourage one another, support each other, and back yourself.